I had been staring at the invitation on my phone for the past 15 minutes, unsure of what to do. My sister, Elena, had just turned 40 and wanted me to spend a full week at her house to celebrate. It had been 2 years since I last visited. 2 years since I had seen my nephew, Daniel. Time had moved quickly, too quickly. My job had pulled me to a different city, and before I knew it, the months turned into years. I told myself I was too busy to visit, too caught up in work, but deep down I knew that wasn't entirely true. I was lonely. The kind of loneliness that settled deep into my bones. At 32 I had built a comfortable life for myself, yet something always felt missing. Relationships had come and gone, but nothing ever lasted. There was always a disconnect, an emptiness I couldn't quite fill. Maybe that was why the idea of going back, of being surrounded by family, felt both comforting and unsettling. So I needed a break. I let out a long sigh and picked up my phone. I'll be there. Can't wait to see you all. Almost instantly, my sister replied with a string of heart emojis and an enthusiastic, "Daniel will be so happy to see you." I paused at that. The last time I saw him he was 16, still growing into himself. Lean, awkward, with that quiet shyness that made him seem older than his years. Now he was 18, officially an adult. I wondered how much he had changed. The drive back to my hometown felt strangely nostalgic. The roads, the trees lining the highway, the little roadside diner that still had the same neon sign flickering in and out. It all brought back memories I hadn't thought about in years. By the time I pulled into my sister's driveway, the sun was starting to set. The house looked the same, warm and inviting, with the faint glow of lights spilling through the windows. Before I could even grab my bag, Elena was at the door, waving enthusiastically. "Sophia, you're finally here." She wrapped me in a tight hug, her familiar scent of vanilla and cinnamon filling my senses. "Missed you," I murmured, hugging her back. "Missed you more. Come inside. Daniel's been waiting." At her words, I felt something shift in my stomach. A strange flutter of nerves. As I stepped inside, the scent of home-cooked food wrapped around me, instantly making me feel at ease. And then as I turned toward the living room, I saw him. Daniel. I almost didn't recognize him at first. He had changed, grown. Gone was the lanky teenager I remembered. He stood taller, his shoulders broader, his presence more confident. His dark hair was slightly tousled, and when he looked at me, I saw something in his eyes that made me pause. "Aunt Sophia," he said, his voice deeper than I expected. I smiled, pushing aside the strange feeling curling in my chest. "Wow, look at you. You've grown so much." A small smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. "That's what happens in 2 years." I chuckled, shaking my head. "I suppose so." He stepped closer, and for a brief second, I felt the warmth of his presence, something unfamiliar yet oddly familiar at the same time. I told myself it was just the natural shock of seeing someone after so long. But as the night went on, and as we settled into the rhythm of conversation, I couldn't ignore the way Daniel's gaze lingered on me longer than it should. The evening passed in a blur of warmth and laughter. Elena, in her usual way, made sure everyone felt at home, her laughter filling the space as she moved from one guest to another. She had always been the social one, the glue that kept people together. Watching her now, surrounded by friends and family, I realized how much I had missed her. I handed her the neatly wrapped box I had brought, and she gasped with delight as she tore the paper open. "Sophia, you didn't have to," she exclaimed, pulling out the delicate silver bracelet. Tiny charms dangled from it, each one representing a special moment in her life. "I wanted to," I said, squeezing her hand. Elena pulled me into a hug, and for a brief moment, I felt the deep comfort of being home, of belonging. Around us, guests mingled. Old family friends, a few of her coworkers, and even some neighbors I barely recognized. The house was filled with chatter, the clinking of glasses, and the rich scent of the birthday cake waiting on the dining table. I was halfway through a conversation with one of her friends when I felt a gentle tug on my wrist. I turned to see Daniel standing beside me, his expression unreadable. "Aunt Sophia, can you come upstairs for a second?" he asked. His voice was steady, but there was something in his eyes, something almost hesitant. "Of course," I said, excusing myself as he led me up the stairs. The noise from the party faded as we reached the quiet of the second floor. The house hadn't changed much. Same family photos lining the hallway, same creaky wooden floors. But as we reached Daniel's room, I realized he had changed. His room used to be a mess of video games and sports equipment, but now it was neater, more refined. A few books lined the shelves, a desk was covered with sketches and papers, and the bed was made, almost too neatly as if he had gone out of his way to prepare for my visit. "What did you want to show me?" I asked, stepping inside. He hesitated for a second before closing the door behind me. I wanted to talk to you alone for a bit," he admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. I raised an eyebrow, leaning against the desk. "That sounds serious." He let out a quiet chuckle. "Not serious exactly. I don't know. It's been 2 years and I feel like we barely got to talk downstairs." Something about the way he said it made warmth spread through my chest. I smiled. "Well, I'm here now. What's on your mind?" Daniel sat on the edge of his bed, watching me for a moment before finally speaking. "You know, I really missed you." The words were simple, but there was a weight to them that caught me off guard. "I missed you too," I said softly. "A lot." He exhaled, shaking his head. "It's just weird. You were always around when I was younger and then suddenly you were gone. I mean, I get it, you had to move your job and everything. But, I don't know. I guess I never realized how much I relied on you being here until you weren't." Guilt pricked at me. I had left, not thinking about how it might have affected him. He had been 16, still figuring things out, and I had just disappeared from his daily life. I took a slow breath. "I'm sorry, Daniel. I never meant to make you feel like that." He shook his head. "I'm not mad. It's just different now." I watched him closely. His expression was calm, but there was something beneath it. Something unreadable. "You have changed," I said, trying to lighten the mood. "You're taller, more confident. You seem different." Daniel met my gaze, his lips curving into a small smile. "And you look exactly the same." I rolled my eyes. "Oh, please. I'm sure I've aged at least 5 years since you last saw me." "No," he said, shaking his head. "Not at all." For a moment, silence stretched between us. Not awkward, but something else. Something warm, almost familiar yet unfamiliar at the same time. Then Daniel stood up and walked over to his desk. "Here. I actually do have something to show you," he said, pulling out a sketchbook. I raised an eyebrow as he handed it to me. "You draw?" I asked, flipping through the pages. "Yeah. I mean, it's just a hobby, but I thought you might like to see." I glanced down at the sketches, detailed pencil drawings, some of landscapes, others of people. He was good. Really good. "Daniel, these are amazing," I said, genuinely impressed. His face lit up slightly, and I realized that underneath all his newfound confidence, there was still a part of him that wanted validation. That wanted me to see him. I kept flipping through, pausing when I saw a sketch that made my breath hitch slightly. It was me. Not just any drawing, but one so intricately detailed that it was clear he had spent hours on it. It wasn't just a simple portrait. It captured something deeper, something raw. It was a sketch of me laughing, my head tilted slightly, my eyes filled with warmth. My fingers lingered over the page. You drew this from memory?" Daniel hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah." I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. "It's beautiful." His gaze flickered to mine. "I wanted to remember you the way I saw you." Something about the way he said it made my heart skip a beat. For a moment we just stood there, the quiet hum of the party downstairs feeling like a world away. I exhaled, setting the sketchbook down. "You really are talented, Daniel. You should keep doing this." He smiled, but there was something else in his expression. Something softer. "I will." The air between us felt different now, heavier in a way that wasn't uncomfortable but undeniable. "I should probably head back down," I said, my voice quieter than before. He nodded but didn't move. "Yeah, probably." But neither of us made the first step toward the door. And for the first time since I had arrived, I wondered if maybe, just maybe, the distance between us had changed more than I had realized. I should have left. I knew it. The party was still going on downstairs. Guests were laughing, glasses clinking. But up here in the quiet of Daniel's room, it felt like time had slowed, stretching into something neither of us seemed willing to break. I shifted slightly, my fingers brushing against the edge of his desk, but still I didn't move toward the door. Neither did he. Instead, Daniel exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck, his gaze flickering to the floor before meeting mine again. "So, are you seeing anyone?" His question caught me off guard, not because it was inappropriate but because of the way he asked it. casual on the surface but with something heavier underneath. I blinked at him, trying to ignore the way my pulse had quickened. No. Not really. Not really. He raised an eyebrow, a small smirk tugging at his lips. I let out a short laugh, shaking my head. I mean, I've dated here and there, but nothing serious. No one close. Daniel nodded slowly as if considering my words. Why do you ask? I added, tilting my head slightly. His smirk faltered for a second before he shrugged. Just curious. Something about the way he said it sent an odd, unspoken current through the space between us. And for some reason, before I could stop myself, I asked, "What about you? Are you seeing anyone?" Daniel's expression didn't change right away, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Something unreadable. "No," he said simply. I nodded, expecting that to be the end of it. But then he added almost hesitantly, "I tried. Once or twice. It never really felt right." My breath caught slightly at his words, though I wasn't entirely sure why. Felt right. I echoed, my voice quieter now. Daniel let out a small chuckle, but there was no real humor in it. "I don't know. Just never clicked with anyone, I guess. It's like..." He paused, searching for the words. "It's like I was waiting for something without even realizing it." I swallowed, suddenly aware of how close we were standing. It was strange. How normal this conversation should have been, and yet how not normal it felt. Waiting. The word lingered in the air between us, neither of us willing to acknowledge the weight of it. "Maybe you just haven't met the right person yet," I said, forcing my voice to stay even. Daniel's gaze lingered on me for a second too long before he nodded. "Yeah. Maybe." Silence stretched between us again. Not awkward, not tense, just charged. I could feel my own heartbeat in my ears, a steady, rhythmic reminder that I should step away, should break the moment before it became something I didn't understand. But I didn't move. Neither did he. "You're different," Daniel said suddenly, his voice softer than before. I frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" He leaned against the edge of his bed, arms crossed, his gaze never leaving mine. "I don't know. You feel different than how I remember." I let out a small, breathy laugh. "Well, it has been 2 years." "Yeah, but it's not just that." His voice was quieter now, more thoughtful. "I used to think of you as..." He stopped himself, shaking his head slightly. "I don't know. But now it's like I'm seeing you for the first time." My breath hitched, though I tried to cover it up with a forced smile. "That's a dramatic way to put it." Daniel smirked slightly, but his expression still held that same unreadable intensity. "Maybe." The air in the room felt thick, charged with something I couldn't quite name. It wasn't wrong, but it wasn't entirely right either. It was just there, something neither of us seemed willing to break. I should say something. I should laugh it off, tell him we should go back downstairs before Elena came looking for us. But instead I found myself saying, "I think I know what you mean." The words slipped out before I could stop them, and for a split second, Daniel just stared at me as if he wasn't sure he had heard me correctly. "You do?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I swallowed, my fingers curling slightly against the wooden desk. "Yeah. I mean, it's different now, isn't it?" His eyes flickered over my face, searching for something. An answer, maybe. "Yeah," he murmured. "It is." For the briefest moment I felt something shift, something subtle yet undeniable. A breath too long, a glance too lingering, a silence that stretched just a second past what was appropriate. And still neither of us moved. Neither of us broke the moment. It wasn't wrong. But it was something. Something neither of us were ready to name. Finally, Daniel let out a quiet breath and ran a hand through his hair, breaking the silence first. "We should probably head back down." "Yeah," I said, my voice softer than I intended. But neither of us moved. And somehow I knew, this moment, whatever it was, wasn't over yet. It was only just beginning. Daniel's words hung between us, weighty yet unspoken, filling the space where logic should have intervened. "I can see you don't want to go there as much as I do." At first I laughed, soft, uncertain, a nervous reaction to the quiet intensity in his voice. "That's ridiculous," I said, shaking my head. I mean, it's just a conversation, Daniel." But the way he looked at me, his head tilted slightly, his gaze unwavering, made my pulse quicken. "You really think that?" he asked. I opened my mouth to say yes. To dismiss whatever this was. But no words came. Because he was right. I didn't want to leave this room. I didn't want to step back into the noise of the party, into the safe distance of family chatter and polite conversations. I wanted to be here, with him. Realizing it made my skin prickle with warmth, but I didn't run from it. I couldn't. Daniel watched me carefully, his lips curving slightly as if he had known my answer before I even admitted it to myself. Without saying anything else, he moved across the room, unlocking the window and pushing it open. A cool breeze slipped inside, carrying with it the scent of the evening, the damp earth, the distant hum of crickets, the faint traces of autumn in the air. I watched as he reached into the drawer of his desk, pulling out a small half-empty pack of cigarettes. "You smoke?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Sometimes," he said, slipping one between his lips. "Only when I feel like it." He flicked the lighter, the tiny flame illuminating his face for a second before the glow of the cigarette replaced it. He took a slow drag, exhaling out the window, his gaze drifting to the darkening sky. "Want one?" I hesitated for a moment. It had been years since I had last smoked. One of those fleeting habits I had picked up in college, something to do in between conversations, something to make me feel a little reckless in a life that had always been carefully planned. But now in this room with Daniel standing there, his silhouette softened by the fading light, the offer didn't feel reckless. Felt intimate. I stepped closer. "Yeah. Why not?" He smirked slightly, pulling another cigarette from the pack and handing it to me. Our fingers brushed just for a second, but I felt the warmth of his skin like a lingering spark. I brought it to my lips, and before I could reach for the lighter, he was already there, flicking it open, holding the flame out for me. His eyes never left mine as I leaned in, the fire catching, the first inhale filling my lungs. The taste was familiar, bitter, warm, smoky. But somehow it was different now. Maybe because of where I was. Maybe because of who I was with. We stood there, side by side at the window, the cool night air curling around us, smoke drifting lazily toward the stars. "Feels kind of cinematic, doesn't it?" Daniel said, a playful smirk in his voice. I exhaled slowly, watching the tendrils of smoke disappear into the night. "A little." Silence stretched between us again, but this time it wasn't awkward. It was comfortable. The kind of quiet that didn't need to be filled with words. I glanced at him out of the corner of my eye. He looked different in this light. Older, sharper. The boy I had left behind 2 years ago was gone. The man standing beside me now was someone else entirely. "You know," I said after a moment, "your mom would kill you if she knew you smoked." Daniel chuckled, tapping the ash off the end of his cigarette. "Yeah, well, guess it's a good thing she doesn't know. And if she sees us out here?" He grinned. "Then I'll just tell her it was your idea." I let out a soft laugh, shaking my head. "You're impossible." For a while we just stood there, sharing the cigarette between us, passing it back and forth like some kind of quiet ritual. Every time my fingers brushed against his, a subtle thrill ran through me. Not alarming, not overwhelming, just there. Present. At some point, Daniel exhaled slowly, tilting his head toward the sky. "I used to sit here a lot," he said, his voice quieter now. "After you left." I turned to look at him. "Yeah." He nodded. I'd open the window, smoke, stare at the sky. Just think. I took another drag, my mind drifting to all the nights I had spent alone in my own apartment, staring at my phone, wondering if I should call, if I should reach out. But I never had. And now I wondered if maybe, just maybe, Daniel had been waiting for that call. "What did you think about?" I asked. He glanced at me, his expression unreadable for a second before he looked away again. "You," he said finally. The word landed between us like a quiet confession. My breath hitched, but I covered it by taking another slow drag of the cigarette. "Daniel." He turned to face me fully now, his gaze steady. "I know it's weird," he admitted. "I know I shouldn't say things like that. But if we're being honest tonight, then yeah. Thought about you. A lot." I swallowed, the smoke in my lungs suddenly feeling heavier. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Daniel let out a slow, humorless laugh. "Because no one else ever felt the same." I opened my mouth to respond, to say something, but nothing came. As I understood. I understood. The way we had always just fit together, the way conversations never felt forced, the way 2 years apart had done nothing to erase the familiarity between us. I should have been afraid of that realization. But I wasn't. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know where this was going. But as Daniel reached for the last remnants of the cigarette, his fingers brushing against mine once more, I knew one thing for certain. Neither of us wanted this moment to end.